All right. Okay. Hello, my name is Cameron Riesenberger. I am the Assistant Manager of Information Services at the St. Louis County Library. Thank you so much for joining us for a presentation presented by Juan Vasquez on exploring consumer insights with Simply Analytics. Juan is the support and sales manager for the Simply Analytics team. He's worked in software through various roles for over 12 years and previously worked in the nonprofit industry as a planner, authoring community assessments for grant applications. So I'll turn it over to Juan. Juan, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Cameron, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, as well, for joining me today. Um, if you've ever wondered how companies or political campaigns or yourself can leverage data to make informed decisions, you've come to the right place. The goal for today is going to be to explore not just the Simply Analytics platform, but also to dig deep in talking about all of the amazing data sets that you have access to. Now, these data sets are the same data sets that companies use every single day, and they've been using these things for decades at this point. So I'm really excited to show you and kind of give you behind the scenes of how data is leveraged and how especially you can use that for your own research and your own analyses. So with that said, I'm going to turn off my video here and we're going to jump right into the database. Okay, so I like to begin these sessions with the kind of elevator pitch of Simply Analytics just to make sure that we have a sort of foundational understanding of what the platform actually is. So in Simply Analytics, the way to think of us is we are a data platform and we pull in data from different resources and different vendors. So we have partnerships with exclusive data collection entities like Dun& and Bradstreet and MRI Simmons and Claritas. And we also get data from things like the Census and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the idea is we take all of these different data sets from these different providers and we incorporate it into our platform and make it actually approachable and easy to use for everyone. That's the kind of idea of the database. And I'm going to talk about the types of data you have access to as we proceed throughout the session today. But that's how to think of it, right? Just like a platform to be able to interact with data from different vendors. Now, when you sign into the database, you're going to be met with this onboarding tutorial. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to close this out, but if you have more time to check it out, please do. It'll kind of walk you through how to get started in the database. So let's close this out so we can get started analyzing data. So when it comes to consumer behavior data or demographic data, if you think about it, it's all connected to locations. So whether the piece of data that we're looking at is the number of people who speak Spanish, or whether it's the percentage of people who have recently purchased Adidas shoes, it doesn't matter. Like it's all connected to locations, right? So it's all about locations. So as we begin in the platform, we need to specify at least one location to get us started. Now, just to get the ball rolling here, I'm going to throw in St. Louis County. I'm going to type in my home zip code here in Tucson, Arizona. And if you're wondering how granular, how small can you pull the data for it? Now you see that I've typed in a county and a zip code. The answer to that is the census block group level. If you've never heard of that, that's totally fine. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a moment, but I did want to kind of answer that frequently asked question of how small can you pull the data? Think of it, a good way to think of it is kind of like the neighborhood level. But again, I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. Okay, so I've got a couple of locations. Don't feel obligated to list every single location you might ever be interested in. Don't worry, we can always add in other ones. We can always dissect these locations and add others. So let's go ahead and proceed here. So let's click on next. And believe it or not, this is the last step to getting started, which is basically those locations that we have, we need to connect them to some data. Now, as a courtesy, the Simply Analytics database will suggest some data variables for you. We call these seed variables. You can see here things like educational attainment or median household income. I'm just going to click on a few of these here. And what I will say is if you're really new to the database, your best bet is to click on a few of these. Even if you think that you maybe don't want these pieces of data, we can always remove them anyway. But as far as getting started, I would highly recommend to click on a few of these, like I've done here, and click Create Project. So let's go ahead and get started here. Well, there we have it. We've created our very first project in Simply Analytics. So what the database does for us as a courtesy is it automatically generates a couple of different ways to view data, and those are housed towards the very far right-hand side of the screen. So you'll notice we've got a comparison table, a quick report, a map, and a ranking. There's a bunch of other ways to view information as well, which we're going to talk about today. But think of these towards the right and under this little new view button, all of these things, they're literally different ways to view data. Now, right now we've got the map selected, of course, as we can see in our screen. But if you think about it, these thematic maps that we're looking at, which we're going to kind of talk a little bit more about in a second. But if you think about it, it's just a way to view data, right? Just like a comparison table and a ranking. Now, each of these has a purpose, and we're going to talk about that purpose as we proceed and explore some of these other views. Okay, we've got the map selected, so let's talk about maps. So right now, you'll notice that we're looking at median household income in St. Louis County by zip codes, but we have data at smaller location types too. So we could say, well, that's cool that we could look at income in the county by zip codes, but also we can hit this drop down and say, well, let's take a look at the county by census tracts. And if you've never heard of a census tract, that's totally fine. It's basically a boundary type established by the census that is just smaller than a zip code. So we all know things like we actually already know about most of them, right? So we know about cities and states. These are all just boundaries. That's basically all that they are, right? So if you see the state of Missouri has its own boundary, of course, and this is the same sort of concept, right? These are just really small. So I'm going to say, let's take a look at the county again by zip codes, census tracts, or let's get even smaller, right? This is the most granular. I'm going to jump over into this block groups here. And that is the most granular we can pull the data for. Now, the cool thing about this, I'm going to hit this little plus option here just so I can zoom in. And I'm going to keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in just to give you an idea of what a block group actually looks like. I'm going to keep zooming in. You have to bear with me here. So you can see how small these block groups actually are. Now, what's cool about this is think of having access to literally hundreds of thousands of pieces of data. Now, we're still looking at income here down to this level of granularity, right? So if you think of a block group, right, I see people refer to these as neighborhoods, and actually sometimes I do that myself too. But it's technically, if you look at this again, I'm going to zoom in one more time. It's kind of like a few neighborhoods, right? But it is a pretty good way to think and kind of about like, well, how granular can you pull this information for, which is really, really fascinating. Now I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. And in Simply Analytics, just a little tip for you as you're exploring your maps. If you're ever looking at a particular location, right? Like maybe this area, around Kingsland, maybe this is my research area, right? Like, oh, that's my neighborhood. Maybe that's where I live, or maybe that's the research zone that I want to do some analysis for. A little tip with your maps is there's this little information button here. It's called an eye tool. This allows you to select a location and it's going to highlight the boundaries for that. But what's really nice is it's going to give me the name, right? So sometimes when users are exploring the map, and again, you're like, hey, that's where I live. for example, or that's where I want to do some research on. You can use this little eye tool, this information button, to select a location. It'll give you the name of that, which is really great. And we could favorite this and it give us the value for that, right? Like what is the income for this little literal neighborhood right here? Gives me the value for that. And I'm going to favorite this just so we could say, let's come back and do a bunch of research on that neighborhood and we'll come back and circle back. But for now, I'm going to add this to my favorites just because there's no way I'm going to memorize BG2141002, right? So let's just add this to my favorites. I'm going to click the little hand icon again and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Okay, so what these maps do, right? Like what is the purpose of these thematic maps? Well, if you think about it, it's just a way to view data, as I mentioned at the onset, right? In my case, we're looking at distributions of income throughout the county. Now, obviously, looking at this map, you're kind of like, well, there's obviously different shades of red going on the map. What is that, right? Like what does that represent? And that gets us into the map legend. So you'll notice that the map legend will always help you to interpret what we're actually looking at. So you'll notice that this goes in order of incomes, right? So the darker shades of red that you get, the higher incomes you get, right? So you see this lightest shade of red goes up to 52,000. We have 52 to 68, 68 to 85, and so on, right? So the darker shades of red is the more affluent places. Now, this just helps us to visualize again the income distributions across an area. Now, I'm not going to get too into the weeds as far as changing your maps, but I will kind of pique your interest. You can change the color schemes. You can add in text labels by hitting this little edit button. But just to pique your interest for maybe a more advanced session at a later date. We'll get really into the weeds about changing some of these more advanced things. But for now, I'm going to click on done. I'm just going to change it to this purple color here. So what else can we do with these maps? Well, in Simply Analytics, one of our partners is a business collection entity. And they do a bunch of other things too, but their sort of bread and butter is this idea of collecting business information. And we can actually place businesses on top of this map. So at the very top left of the database, we call these the building blocks of the database. Now I'm going to click on this businesses here. And in this little search functionality right underneath my little block, I'm going to type in Starbucks and press enter. And what the database will do is it's going to plot these little orange dots to represent any business related to your keyword. Now, my keyword here, right, was Starbucks. So this is a really fascinating example of how companies are leveraging data. Because if you look at this map, remember, we're still showing income, right? I changed it to purple, but it's the same thing, right? Like the darker shades of purple represent higher incomes. And if you look to see the distributions of Starbucks locations relative to income, you can kind of see a trend, right? You can see a trend, generally speaking, they're sourced in areas that are higher incomes for the most part. Now, this is a really sort of direct sort of example of how companies are leveraging data to make informed decisions because a company like Starbucks, they want those repeat customers, right? And they might know that Starbucks can be a little bit expensive and they want those repeat customers and people who might not care that it's like 10 bucks or something, right? And what's interesting and really fascinating is you can recreate this map in pretty much any major city, like under the locations block at the top left. Just as a quick side here, I'm just going to jump into Chicago just because I want to show you. If you'll notice, it's the same trend, right? The darker shades of purple, it's where basically all of the Starbucks are located. Let's jump back over into St. Louis County here. Okay, let's get back to our map. Now, I bring that up just because I want to show you the sort of literal foundations of what a lot of different entities are built when they're building out their business expansion plans or their feasibility studies. This is a great starting point because one, it allows them to see, well, where are my competitors, right? If Starbucks is your competitor, for example, we get to see literally where they are. And two, how many of them are there, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, if you ever notice a little orange dot with a number on them, it just means that there's a bunch of locations in that general vicinity, and we just have to zoom in. So if we just zoom in, they'll decluster, right? So there was like, I think they were showing like seven or eight, but if we keep zooming in and zooming in and zooming in, you could see that they're just kind of close to each other, right? Now you can click any of these little orange dots. You can see if there's, maybe there's a Starbucks inside of this Target store, and you'll get more information about that. But if I zoom out again, you'll notice that these little orange dots, they'll start to have a number on them. So just throw that out there in case you're ever curious, looking at a map and you're like, well, what does that actually mean? Okay, now the keyword search under my businesses block, it's nice because it's really simple, right? To just type in a keyword. But remember, it's a keyword search, right? So like if you search for something like Starbucks, yeah, that's probably okay. But if you, for example, were to search for something like McDonald's, well, you're going to find things like the law offices of Janet McDonald. And you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute. Why is that showing up? I just wanted to see McDonald's fast food. But that's because this business search here, it is a keyword search, right? So it's going to find anything related to your business. Okay, now, I'm going to show you before we navigate away from our maps and businesses that if you want to be more technically correct, I would recommend that you browse to these business categories. So these business points are updated once a month, and you have access to what's called points of interest. So it's going to be businesses related to place to go, place to shop, things to do, place to eat, kind of those types of businesses. And under this browsing by business categories, the nice thing is in the US, we like to organize and track the number and types of businesses. So those get organized into what are called NAICS codes. And every business has a code associated with it. So if your business is a flower shop, there's a code for that. If your business is a Mexican restaurant, there's a code for that too, right? So there's a code for all of these businesses. And if you're watching this, you could probably see where I'm headed here. But I'm basically going to run a business query to reflect a more particular type of business, right? Like I want to be more exact instead of just saying Starbucks, right? So let's talk about how this would look. So first we're going to jump into these are 6-digit codes. So we're going to jump into this broad category here for retail trade. Within that, we have car dealerships, we have grocery stores. I'm going to click on this grocery and convenience stores here. And lastly, I get to choose between vending machine operators, supermarkets. I'm going to choose this convenience stores here just because I want to see the distribution of convenience stores. So let's click on that. And there you have it. Now, a little tip here is if you ever want to get rid of things outside, like I don't like, for example, if I don't want to see St. Charles, for example, you can choose in your map to view actions and apply a location mask. And that'll just get rid of everything outside of your formal boundaries. Now, remember, we're still looking at St. Louis County, so it's always interesting and fun to see, well, what does St. Louis County, Missouri actually look like, right? And this is technically what it looks like. It's pretty interesting, right? So feel free to explore that all throughout the US, which is really interesting, right? Okay, so already as we've begun here, this is really advanced sort of research to begin our either business feasibility studies or expansion plans. And if you ever want to get this map out of the database, all you have to do is click the export button towards the top right. I'm not going to get into the weeds with the exporting, but you can crop your image, you can add in text labels, and it's really high resolution. You could export this as a PNG, JPEG, or PDF formats, and they look really nice incorporated into any presentations that might call for a visualization like a thematic map. Okay, so let's close this out here. Now, for users who are thinking, well, that's great that I get to see these little orange dots, right? And we know that we could click on them and, there's a quick trip here that I just selected. But what if I just wanted that spreadsheet of those businesses, right? Simply Analytics thinks that you want that too. So towards the very far right, where we have our different reports, I'm going to jump over. There's this new one at the very bottom here for businesses. I'm going to click on this. And basically, this is going to be a spreadsheet of those orange dots that we saw on the map. Now, what's really cool is Simply Analytics will store all of your results for you, which is really, really nice. Um, so please, as you begin to use Simply Analytics yourself, feel free to create an account. That way, all of your work will be saved, which is great because you'll notice that it's starting to save some of my business queries that we looked at, right? If you want to export this out of the database, all you have to do is hit the export button here, and you can get this spreadsheet as an Excel, CSV, or DBF formats. And this again, it's a kind of a spreadsheet of those orange dots, and it'll give you some more information about each of those points that we looked at. So you can kind of see. And if you wanted to add other fields of data, you're totally welcome under View Actions to go to columns, and you can add in things like, like the website and, things like that. You could just add those in. So you could see here, we're looking at some of these websites for each of those Starbucks locations, which is pretty nice to be able to have. Okay, so working with maps and working with businesses, it's a big part of the database, but a lot of the, and you can map any piece of data that you're looking at. We were looking at income, right? You could look at any piece of data as you want. And what we're going to do now is we're going to transition into talking about the different ways to look at data and the other types of questions that we can answer with data. Okay, so let's toggle towards let's take a really, really quick look at this quick report here. So this was created for me again towards the very far right. This was created for me at the very beginning. Remember how I said that as a courtesy, Simply Analytics creates some things for us, like the map that we just talked about. It also creates a quick report. And this quick report, you could think of this as kind of like a community snapshot of any location of your choosing. So you'll notice that it has St. Louis County and it has my home zip code here in Tucson. Now, this is us selecting for the user about 100 pieces of data related to demographics. So think of things like age, gender, race, ethnicity, language, housing, income, all of this data instantly compiled for you. The idea behind this is if you ever just want to jump into the database and you're like, hey, give me a demographic snapshot. Just tell me what the people are like in my neighborhood or in my zip code or something like that. That's what this is for. This is us picking a bunch of data for you. And if you want to add any other locations, you're totally welcome to just start typing them in, right? Like you under this locations block, you could just type in another location. Maybe let's throw in a random zip code from Manhattan. Totally fine. You'll see that it just gets thrown in there. And maybe remember I favorited that little neighborhood at the beginning under locations here. You'll notice that you've got this little star here. That's for my favorite. So I'm going to click on that, select that block group, and it'll just add that location in there for me. So I have that neighborhood automatically added for me. The cool thing about this is this allows you to just kind of see, right, all of those different data variables, right? Like how does it compare to like the county when it comes to educational attainment or something like that, right? All of this data instantly compiled for us. That is the quick report. And there's not much else to say about it. It looks really nice when you export this into Excel. It keeps this same format. So it looks really great incorporated into any presentations as well. Okay, so let's jump over into this comparison table. Now remember, the quick report, it's kind of like you come in and you say, just give me a snapshot of any location throughout the entire country. Let's jump over to this comparison table now. Now, once I show you how to browse for data and add new pieces of data, believe it or not, that's like 80% of how to use the database. And everything else, once I show you how to do this, it's going to be a little bit more interesting. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and do a little bit more analyses and get into these concepts of types of data and seeking out locations. Okay, so this comparison table, what is this? This is basically like you're building a spreadsheet from scratch. So the idea behind this is, maybe you don't want the maps, right? Maybe you don't want the businesses. Remember the quick report, we pick a bunch of data for you, but maybe you don't want that either, right? Maybe you're just kind of like, well, I want to compare some different locations. Like maybe I want to throw in the state of Missouri. I'm going to click on locations here. We're just going to type in Missouri. And I just think of this as just give me the answers. That's the way I'd like to think of this comparison table. Just give me the data answers for the locations that I want. Now, remember, we added St. Louis County in my home zip code, but you can always just type in and add your other ones as you see appropriate. Okay, so here's where things are going to start to get a little more interesting, which is talking about the data that you have, the types of data, and how we can explore and work with the data. So first, under this data block here at the top left, you'll notice that there is a data search functionality. Okay, this is going to be one of your best friends because you literally have access to hundreds of thousands of data variables, including over 8,000 brands. Okay. So it's only good. You're never going to really know every single piece of data that exists. There's just no way. But this search here is nice because it helps you to kind of quickly find out, right? Like, is there data related to this or that? Like, so, for example, in my search here, I'm just going to type in Nike and press enter. And what the database will do is it's going to start showing me some pieces of data related to that keyword. Now, I'm going to choose this one at the very top here. This would be athletic shoes, brands that you've bought in the last 12 months, Nike. And then I'm going to hit this little X. Now, this is really interesting because you'll notice that it's added that data variable at the bottom. That's why I said this comparison table, it's basically like just give me the answers, right? So I wanted to look up something with Nike for my own locations that I wanted to look at, and it's just giving me those answers. So we get to see, well, in St. Louis County, the percentage of adults who have bought athletic shoes in the last 12 months of those that were Nike is about 19%. And we can compare that with my home zip code here in Tucson, right? Which clips at a little bit higher, right? So for whatever reason, hey, my zip code, maybe they just prefer Nike shoes. Who knows, right? But you can compare other brands too. Feel free to type them in and you can kind of explore it in that way. Now, this, as you might imagine, is kind of getting into these ideas of market and consumer research. Right. And I'm the type of person, like I hate when things are just concepts and no one shows me what it actually means. So when you hear things like market and consumer research, well, this is literally it, right? Because think about it. We're looking at adults. So anytime you see things with the Simmons, it's going to be adults, right? And we're comparing that across different markets, right? So companies like Nike, for example, love this sort of information because they like to know, well, what's the sort of market penetration of our brand in St. Louis County? But how does that compare with like, I'm just going to throw in Los Angeles County, right? You could say, well, Los Angeles County is 25%. So the folks over at Nike are doing this to help them understand some market research across these different areas, right? Like across these different geographies, which is really, really fascinating, right? Now, remember the data block, data search, one of your best friends. It's surprising the scope of data that you have access to as well. If you are ever interested in, like, well, I wanted to do some research on like yoga, type it in, right? See what exists. We're going to look at percentage of adults who do yoga 2+ times a week. I'm just going to click that, hit this little X, and again, it's been added in there at the very bottom. Now, the nice thing is, remember, we can always click the locations here and add in any other locations that we choose to add. So really, really fascinating to interact with the data in that way. Okay, once I show you next how to browse, right? This was searching for data, right? You just type in a keyword, and the worst thing that can happen is nothing comes up. So don't, don't feel hesitant to search for your information. Feel free to just throw stuff in there and just try to like find, right? Because there's a lot of information. Okay, let's browse. Now, let's peruse through the data directory to see what's available. There's two different ways to do this, and it's your preference, whichever one you prefer. First, we can browse either by these broad categories. And the idea behind this is kind of similar to Amazon. So, you know how, like, if you're shopping for things on Amazon, you say, like, oh, I want to find shoes. Well, you're going to find like 5 million results, but then you can filter it down, right? You could say, well, I wanted this brand or this color or this size. This is the same concept. So I'm going to click on a piece of data like, let's say, education. And you can see that there's 3,574 data variables related to education, which is a lot, right? You could keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through all of those, but that's way too much, right? But if you notice in my little variables panel here, towards the left, again, kind of similar to Amazon, right? We get to filter this down. So I'm going to say, well, actually, I wanted to look up education attainment data, which is nice. We're getting this down a little bit. But I wanted to look up attainment data for, let's say, females that are Hispanic. So I'm just filtering this down more and more and more. And now you can see that there's 20 pieces of data related to educational attainment for Hispanic females, right? So we're getting really, really hyper specific with the type of data that we wanted to look at. If you find a data variable that you like, all you have to do is click it. Remember, you click a data variable, see the blue check mark, hit this little X, and it gets added in there at the very, very bottom. Again, fascinating. We're comparing all of these different markets by yoga and Nike, and now we've added the Hispanic or Latino females with a bachelor's degree or higher and comparing these markets, right? How does St. Louis County compare to Los Angeles County or to the US, right? Amazing, right? This, just give me the answers, okay? Now, if you did not like what I just showed you, that's totally fine. Instead of browsing by category here, we can choose to browse by data folder. Now, this is going to present you with all of the individual data sets. And this can let you explore the data. It's all the same data, don't get me wrong. We're just looking at it in a different way. And personally, I like data folders better. I'm just more comfortable looking at folders. So the way that this works is if you look at some of these individual data sets, you just click on it. So we'll just look at, let's say, consumer expenditure estimates, and it's just folders and subfolders. So let's take a look at, oh, let's say apparel and services. And we'll look up how much money people are spending on women and girls apparel per year. So this would calculate all of the household spending on women and girls apparel in those geographies. So I'm just going to click on that one, right? close it out, and again, has been added at the very bottom here. This is really useful, especially if you are an entrepreneur or you're considering kind of expanding into a new area. Well, frankly, what would be really useful to know would basically just be, well, are people spending money on whatever it is that my store or product or service is? This lets you just do that, right? So that's consumer expenditure estimates data. But I also want to draw your attention, and for the sake of brevity, to be honest, I could literally be here for weeks exploring all of these data sets. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to have to cut myself off. But basically, I do want to talk about some of these other data sets here. So the community demographics, that's going to be a lot of current year demographic data, right? A lot of the things that we talked about already. Consumer expenditure estimates, total amount spent and household average per year for households in a given geography. Meaning, for example, in St. Louis County, the households are spending about $337 million a year when you add up all of the households in the county just on women and girls apparel and services, which is really cool. And yeah, some of these other ones, I do want to draw your attention. You have CDC health data. This is really fascinating because you can look up things like health risk behaviors like smoking across adults or information on prevention procedures, right? Like, have you had cholesterol screening and disability information? So, lots of really fascinating data to explore. And also, we're going to open up this MRI Simmons local. This is one of my favorite data sets because this is broadly considered, this is like the data set for adult behaviors is the way to think of this. This is something that companies and political campaigns, they really, really like this because this tells you almost everything about adults, okay, in a given location. And I really mean it. This will cover things like the cars that people drive. We've looked at some of this already naturally in our searches, like yoga, right, and things like that. But this will tell you things like which financial products people use, or political leanings, or what types of beer do people drink, and what sort of cleaning products do they use. Now, the sort of topic here was wanting to explore some of these things like psychographics and market segments, right? So if you think about it, what we've talked about so far is data related to things like demographics, right? Data related to spending, data related to behavior. But there's another type of data that's been around for a long time, and that is called psychographics. Now, what is a psychographic? The way that I like to think about it is when our data partner, MRI Simmons, is conducting their survey information, right? Part of their survey is basically statements about their lives, right? And that's kind of what a psychographic is. It's kind of like people rating how they feel about a particular statement about their lives. Okay, it sounds kind of weird. Again, concept. Now let's get into the reality of what that is, right? Okay, so let's open up psychographics here. You'll see that we're going to open up this little folder. So you can see that when it comes to these statements about people's lives, right? Let's go over into, let's say, fashion and style attitudes. Well, some of these are kind of funny and interesting, but you'll see we've got data on buying new clothes gives me a thrill. Well, let's look at the percentage of adults who agree completely that buying new clothes gives them a thrill. Or we'll look at something like I'm willing to spend more than I can afford to get the clothes that I want. Uh, you know, probably not a great thing to do, but I understand. And look at all of the data that you have about makeup is your passion, or top designers make quality clothes. We're gonna close this out here. Now, think of having these sort of psychographics relative to things like food, finance. So food would be something like, I always eat sweets. That'd be like a psychographic. Or I like to try the latest diets as they come out. Um, Finance information, right? Like so where do you get your advice, your financial advice from? Which media do you trust the most? Data on how do you feel about, health information, right? Do you still go to work when you're sick, or do you trust your doctor? There's all sorts of fascinating psychographic data that you can explore, but I wanted to make sure in this presentation that you all come away with an understanding of just what psychographics are. It's basically statements about various aspects of people's lives, adults' lives, and then how they feel about that, right? So, how do you feel about cars, for example? A used car is just as good as a new car. We'll go with agree completely. Remember, you find a data variable that you like, you just click on it, close it out, and it'll get added in there at the very, very bottom for you. So here's where things get kind of interesting because if you look, 17% of the adults in Los Angeles County would actually say, with those who, who took this survey that agree completely that buying new clothes gives them a thrill, right? So really useful. Okay, so if you think about it, up until this point, whenever we're talking about data, there's two kind of broad umbrellas. Like one is understanding locations, which is what we've done, right? Tell me stuff about St. Louis County, right? That's what we've done so far. How much money are they spending? What percentage of adults smoke cigarettes, right? That's one major umbrella of data, right? Consumer demographic spending data, that's a big part of it, understanding locations. Now, what we're going to do with our remaining time is going to be taking this a step further, but also seeking out locations. Okay. So that is going to be really fascinating because sometimes people will say things like, okay, this piece of data, like, buying new clothes gives me a thrill. What can I do with that? Well, companies want to know where those people live, right? Because it's going to help them to tailor the messaging that gets shown into these particular locations. So let's do that. Okay, so at the very far right, where we have our different views, we're just going to toggle to this other one here. This is a ranking report. What this allows you to do is dissect a location by its smaller geographies. What does that mean? Well, look at the top. We're looking at the top 100 cities in St. Louis County. Okay, so we're looking at all the cities in the county. We can hit this drop down and we can say, well, show me all the zip codes, for example. And as the name implies, this enables you to rank a data variable. So we're going to say top 100 zip codes in St. Louis County, but let's sort this by income. So this is a different question, right? This is now saying, show me which zip code in St. Louis County is the most affluent. Now it's telling me that it's a 63131. I have no idea where this is. A little tip here is you can actually click on a cell within your ranking report, and we're just going to create another map, right? Like, let's just see where that zip code is located. So the folks over around Crystal Lake Park and Town and Country and DePerry, maybe I'm probably mispronouncing that, is the most affluent. The most affluent zip code in the entire county. So you can see as I zoom out, looks to be like I don't know, maybe like a suburb, like a really nice suburb area is my guess, because that is a really, really high median household income. That is extremely high. Now, if you're looking at this report and you're like, hey, wait a minute, why is there only two data variables here when in my comparison table we were adding in like cigarette smoking, spending on women and girls, accessory apparel and services? Why are they not here, right? Well, they're not here because this report was created for me at the very beginning. Remember, these were the two little check boxes that I chose at the start. And what's nice is Simply Analytics will remember all of the pieces of data that we've used. which is very convenient because we can go into view actions and we can edit this particular report. And we're going to add in those other, a few of these other ones, right? We'll just add in a couple of these, click on done and close this out. So now we can rank any data variable that we want. And so if you think about it, when companies are leveraging data to make informed decisions, a big part of that is wanting to figure out where to focus things like maybe their marketing efforts, right? Because there's many platforms where you can purchase ads that are geocoded. And that basically just means where do you want to show your ads? Well, some of these institutions will use this to help them figure this out, right? So we could say the top zip codes in the county, but let's rank this by um, doing yoga or buying new clothes gives me a thrill, for example. That's totally fine. We can add that in there. And again, that's been presented here for me. So this helps people to not just find locations, but also figure out how to tailor their messaging into a particular area. Now, remember, there's literally data on so many different things, so we could rank like, we'll look up the highest percentage of zip codes with current adults who smoke cigarettes, right? And we could look that up. Now, this is very helpful for public health entities, right? If you wanted to find out, well, where should we find or even mail, right? You can actually use, the postal service for things like mailing for your business or your institution. And maybe these people that have high percentages of people smoking cigarettes, maybe you can mail them your stop smoking course, or maybe your products, right? Like nicotine patches and things like that. Or maybe it's a nonprofit that can do these things for free. And this is really, really nice to help them figure that out. So the ranking report is one of my favorite reports. And because it just helps us to explore data in a different way, right? Like we've totally moved away from the comparison table, right? Remember, comparison table just answer the questions for my locations. The quick report, a demographic snapshot of whatever location you choose. The maps, well, geospatial analyses, right? Just show me the income distributions visually. The business report, a spreadsheet of our businesses, and the ranking report allows you to dissect a location and rank. Now, I like this because we could extend this as high up or as small as we'd like, meaning I'm looking at all the zip codes in Lewis County, but what if we look at all of the counties in the entire state of Missouri? That is really cool. Or what about all of the zip codes or all of the cities in Missouri? This will calculate and present all of that information for you instantly for all of the locations, right? We're looking at, let's see how many counties are. We can look at all 115 counties in the state instantly and then rank a data variable. Now remember, all of this stuff that I'm showing you here, none of this is trivial research. This is all very complex analyses, but with Simply Analytics, we've tried our best to make even these complex analyses approachable, right? Everything that I've shown you today, you can totally, rewatch this video or even just by playing around. Remember, everything that we've done today, Simply Analytics has just made for me. All I've done is add data, pretty much. Okay, so we're going to spend the next, let's say, our final 10, 12, 15-ish minutes. I just really love talking about data, as you can probably suspect from the sound of my voice. I'm pretty much smiling all the time because this is so fascinating. But we're gonna extend this out. Okay, we're gonna do other research here. Okay, so let's click this new view button. Remember, these views, I'm gonna click this button. They're literally just different ways to view data, right? And have a different purpose because you view data in different ways with these. Okay. So we're going to talk about three final views. We're not going to get into scatter plots and histograms and things like that, but you're totally welcome to explore that. We're going to talk about first this ring study table. Okay, so let's click on create here. So the ring study table, what it allows you to do is you pick one location and we'll calculate the data for you within a 1, 3, and 5 mile radius around that central point. Now, as you might imagine, companies and real estate entities, well, they really like this, right? Because they want to know, well, maybe I've got a retail storefront, or maybe I've got like a plot of land, or maybe I'm trying to sell this home. I want to know what the people are like in the vicinity so I can just make an informed decision. Like, is that good for whatever my business is? So let's talk about this here. I'm going to clear these out. I don't want all of these data variables. So I'm just going to clear those out. And I want to talk about a very frequently asked question, which is, can you type in an address? And the answer is yes, but. So we're going to pretend right now, as we talk about this ring study, like we've got a storefront or something like that, right? And we just want to do some analyses around a particular storefront. So what I'm going to do is under my locations here, I'm just going to type in a location. Well, Simply Analytics is going to ask us if we're looking up an address, and we are. So let's click address search. And you'll notice that it just adds those locations in there for you. Okay. It's geocoded the locations that have data down to that block group level. So I'm going to click that block group. Now remember, the block group is the smallest location type with data. So sometimes you might be thinking, well, if I type in that address, am I getting data for that house? And the answer is no. The reason for that is privacy. Because remember, think of all the data that we're looking at, right? There's political leanings, there's psychographics, there's all sorts of information. It's important to have a level of privacy here. So even if you type in an address, it's going to use that sort of block group, right? That we talk about how I characterize as like a neighborhood or like a few neighborhoods, okay? Um, so we're going to take that area, right? And we're going to tell Simply Analytics, well, give me some stuff, right, about that. I'm just going to see like, well, how many people are there that are, within particular age ranges. I'm just going to add a few of these, close this out, and maybe I'm going to look up the amount spent on women and girls apparel. Okay, so let's click done. And there you have it. Simply Analytics will instantly calculate the data between a 1, 3, and 5 mile radius around your central point. This is really fascinating because it's good to know, well, are people spending money, right, within the vicinity of where I might want to open up my business? Now, don't get me wrong, in Simply Analytics, we're not like a Zillow or like a Redfin or, things like that, like where they have like listings and things like that. That's not really what we do, but you can use those places to find commercial spaces for rent, right? Any properties, put that in there, geocode this, and then we can look at all of the data surrounding that particular location, which is really fascinating. Not much else to say about it other than we'll calculate that data for you. But again, something like this is not trivial. This is very complex analyses because if you think about it, we're helping to determine around a particular address or block group, right? What is it like when it comes to behaviors or spending or demographics? It doesn't matter. For the most part, any number, percentage, or total data variables will be able to be calculated for you. Okay, so let's click on New View once again. So we've got two final things to talk about before I take your questions. The first is we're going to talk about this related data table as it relates to market segments. So this was another sort of key piece of data of types of data that I wanted to talk about, just like we talked about psychographics, right? Let's talk about market segments. So market segments are they've been around for a very long time and they're really popular with companies and political campaigns because the way to think of market segments is it's kind of like a marriage between demographics and lifestyle, right? So it's kind of like bundling up a bunch of data and then just making it easily understandable by types of people or types of households rather. This is going to make a lot more sense in a moment. Again, I'm that type of person. I like to show things when and when they're just might be concepts, right? So let's talk about that. So this related data table, why am I picking this? I'm picking this because this report, if you pick one data variable, it throws in all the sibling variables. So in my case, I'm going to add in one market segment and it's going to add in all of the market segments for me. So how do you use market segments? There's two primary ways that this information gets used. The first is to understand, well, what are the people like in a target location when it comes to market segmentations? And again, this will make more sense in a moment. So let's create a related data table. I don't want all of these locations, so I'm just going to click on clear. Let's just take um, our favorites, right? Remember that location that we favorited. Now, under the data block here, so I chose my favorite. We're going to open up this Prism Premiere. This is, again, premium data that you have access to and really exclusive information. So let's open up these segments. Now you can see they have interesting names, right? Like upper crust and gray power and kids in cul-de-sacs, right? They have these kind of funny names, and each of these has a bunch of data associated with it. Okay, so let's just pick one. Remember, this particular report's going to add in all of them for me anyway. So let's close this out. I've got that selected, got my location, click on done. And now that this has added all of them in there for me, the great thing is if I want to find out what is the top representation of these market segments in a given location, we just choose our location and we're going to sort this from largest to smallest. So you can see that 92%, okay, 92% of the households in this block group, which again, let's show where that block group was, just so we can remember. It was this neighborhood here, right? It's basically saying 92% of the households are these urban modern mix. What does that mean? Let's click this, select view metadata, and this is going to allow you to read more about them. So you can see that they are middle class singles or couples that live in ethnically diverse neighborhoods near or around the city center, fans of basketball, rap concerts. Uh, they average around tech use, spending most of their online time streaming videos on TikTok and using the Telemundo app. So this gives you insights into who those people are. Right now, this is really fascinating and has many different use cases, but it basically kind of enables you to understand what people are like in a given location, which is, again, really, really fascinating. Okay. And it gives us some general lifestyle traits, right? So they might drive a Nissan or a similar type of vehicle, eat at TGI Fridays, shop at Foot Locker, and enjoy going to casinos. Again, very interesting characterization of the households in that particular given neighborhood. Okay, so what's the second way that this gets used? Well, the second way is we can seek out a particular segment. Now, I'm going to show you when we wrap things up during the household items how we can view more about this. But basically, for the sake of time, like what these different entities will do is they'll read about all of these, right? Like they'll read about urban modern mix, they'll read about the city roots, right? They just read about each of these. And then they'll say something like, okay, that urban modern mix that we just read about, right? They like rap concerts, ethnically diverse neighborhoods, blah, blah, blah. Like that's who I really want to reach. So the next question is, as you might be already thinking about right now, is well, where do those people live? I want to know where they live across the United States so I can reach them, right? So we're going to take this urban modern mix here. I'm going to add this to my favorites just because I don't want to go back into the folders, subfolders. So I'm going to click on New View at the very top right. And we're going to open up what we've already talked about, which is this ranking report. So let's click on Create here. I don't want all of those data variables again, so I'm just going to clear these out. And I'm going to add under our data, got this little star for my favorites for urban modern mix. We're going to look that up for the US. Click done. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, show me the top 100 cities in the US, but let's rank this by the percentage of the population that's urban modern mix. Or maybe we want to look up counties or maybe zip codes or something like that. It doesn't matter. We could use that as a way to find out where that characterization of that household, again, market segment, where those people live. So those are the two ways, right? So one, what is the top representation within a given area? You're welcome to type in any other location in our little ring study, and then you sort it. And then two, you can see that in this zip code in Manhattan that I typed in, well, those people are considered connected bohemians, right? It's just interesting to understand these areas. The second way then is choosing one of these segments from reading about them, right? And then building a ranking table to find out where those people live. So really fascinating. Okay, very quickly, I'm going to show you one final thing, and then I'm going to take your questions. So I'm going to click on New View at the top right, and we're going to open up this location query. So this is as advanced as the reports can get in Simply Analytics. And so don't feel intimidated because this is recording. We can always come back to this. But I do want to show you this because it's really fascinating. So think of this location query. If you've ever thought, like for your business or, maybe you offer some type of service, like what this location query is it basically allows you to ask Simply Analytics for a list of locations that meet the criteria that you set forth. Okay. What does that even mean? Okay. So let me show you. Okay, so we're going to take a look at, let's say, let's go with zip codes. Let's find all of the zip codes in the entire country, find all the zip codes in the US that match the following. Well, here is where things get really interesting because we're going to say, remember, I don't want to see all of the, tens of thousands of zip codes in the US. I only want like a type, right? This will help you to do that. So let's say, for example, that we wanted to find all the zip codes in the US where the median income is greater than, let's say, like 80,000. And let's go with, we're going to look through our different data variables that we've used already. I'm going to throw in, I want to look up maybe something like total population. If I haven't added that in there, I'm just going to go into my data here. I'm going to add in total pop. The reason why a lot of when people are using data, they consider total pop a lot of the times. And the reason for that is because in the US, we're such a huge country, right? Like there are zip codes that have really, 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 really few people. And sometimes whenever you're looking at the data, some of the percentages, they might seem a little skewed, right? Because if you think about it, sometimes you might find, oh my God, like 100% of people do yoga or something like in this zip code. But what if this is perfect for my business? But what if there's only 5 people, right? Then maybe it's not, right? So total population is always good to help you kind of make sense of some of this. And this touches a little bit onto that concept of data literacy, right? Okay, so we're going to say all the zip codes in the US where income is greater than 80K and the total population, again, I want to narrow down. I want kind of like a little bit larger populations because we want to remove, some of these smaller areas that might kind of skew the data. So we'll just set this to be greater than 5,000. And, just for fun, we're going to throw in something like, let's look at high incomes with good populations, and we'll look at something like, and Botox, right? So this kind of a real world scenario, okay? Where if we are let's say, for example, that your business is a med spa and you offer services for Botox as part of that, and you want to expand, right? You want to see, like, hey, I know that on average, my customer is probably a little bit more affluent, but I want to make sure that they're using Botox too, right? So this is going to say all the zip codes in the US, income greater than 80K, more than 5,000 in the zip code, and let's just say I'm going to put like 5. I don't know. We can't break anything. The worst that can happen is we'll just see 0. I'm going to click search. And there we have it. Once we scroll towards the very far right, you'll notice that out of all of the zip codes in the US, there are 182 zip codes that match both all of my criteria, high incomes, high populations, and a good percentage of adults who would have used Botox in the last year. Okay, so really, really fascinating and worth a lot of money to run these types of queries like this location query that we talked about, because any piece of data in the program can function as one of your conditions. Okay, that's the most advanced concept that we're going to discuss today. I know that with Simply Analytics, it's one of those databases that you just have to jump in and get your hands dirty. You have to jump in, explore a lot of the data. There's a lot of freedom, right, in the things that I've showed you. We don't have a ton of pre-built things, right? Because we want to give people the freedom to build and do things that they want. But what's great, and I hope that at the end of today, you kind of know a little bit more about, well, what is geospatial analyses, right? Well, that's basically just looking at data on maps. What are things like market and consumer research? Well, that's kind of like everything that we've talked about, exploring the data. And also, we touched even on concepts of wanting to look up total population and kind of some understanding of data literacy, which is really, really good and useful to understand. Now, that wraps up everything I wanted to show today. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over to the questions and I'm going to take a look at the chat now. So thank you everyone for joining me. And yeah, let's check out some of these questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Juan. I learned a lot and I use the database quite a bit too, so that's always a good sign from a presentation. Kind of towards the beginning, Gabby asked, they work with an organization that serves people with disabilities. Are there search criteria data that directly relates? I think I saw something in maybe the CDC folder, or is that information protected?
Oh, yes, yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. So there's actually two sources of disability information. The first, as you pointed out, is under the CDC places. There is a section for disability on that. Now, this information comes from the CDC, right? They have what is called places. And if you're ever curious, you're totally welcome. If you want to read more about it, you can actually view our metadata, right, to read about it. But you can also you can Google it too to read more about them. There's two places. One, this is that first one, right? This will cover things like vision, hearing, uh, self-care, mobility, and cognitive disabilities, right? The other place, believe it or not, the is actually from the census. So the census, it's not just the decennial census that we all know about, right? Like we've all heard about the every 10 years, there's a new census. In between all of those years, of course, there's what is called an American Community Survey. And those are basically asked every, there's a 1 year, 3 year, and a 5 year. But that gets really, really, really detailed. So what I will say, if you want, um, information on disability, it's actually there, believe it or not, under this American Community Survey. There is a section called disability status, and this is actually cross-tabulated disability information, meaning you could look up disability status by age, for example, or disability status by health insurance coverage, or disability status by poverty, and things like that. It is really fascinating. So, yes, there is probably hundreds of pieces of data related to disability information. So, great question.
Yeah. Okay. Dustin asks, are these literal data or projections of some sort? If they are literal, how the heck are they obtained? Seems too creepy to be true.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something that comes up pretty often, especially due to the nature of some of the information, right? So. the data that we've looked at, for example, like MRI Simmons, a lot of this information is modeled data. Now, and that's true of basically most data sets. Some of them will have literal, but if you think about it, like a lot of the Simmons that we've talked about, these are surveys collected nationally, and they'll use their proprietary methodologies to model that information down to those neighborhood levels. So now that information, of course, is technically again modeled, but also it's kind of a nice way to maintain some level of privacy as well, because it's not literally the people in your neighborhood. Now, granted, some of them might have been the survey takers, of course, but for the most part, that information it is modeled down, which is the same thing like the American Community Survey that I was talking about. They have samples that they collect from across the US and they just generate that data down to lower geographies. Because if you think about it, it'd be really difficult to get, you know, millions of people to respond to these surveys. So they do like a sample and it gets into kind of like some survey design methodologies. And you can actually read about the census's design, and you can even read about our um, data partners and their designs too. They'll give you some information about how they chose their samples, right? Like you have to make sure that um, that it's a good representation of, different genders, race, ethnicities, like, all that information, but that kind of goes built into the design. But yeah, so for the most part, it'd be kind of modeled information, even if, again, the American Community Survey, I mean, that is literally taken from the US Census, but even that itself is, we take that as de facto, but also, would have been modeled information on from their end, basically. But yeah, great question.
Right. And I have a question here from Joe. Is there a way to access info and or addresses of new residents within a certain radius from our business in order to send out periodic mailings to new homeowners to welcome them and introduce our business and the services we offer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in Simply Analytics, we ourselves don't store addresses or things like that for anyone. What we do have though is there's information on housing in general and when people moved into a particular location, but it won't be hyper local necessarily. Like meaning you won't know literally who within your neighborhood recently moved. Uh, but but yeah, but what I will say about like mailings and things like that, if you ever work with the Postal Service, they do offer a I forget the name of the exact tool, but they do offer a mailing service where you can choose which zip codes to mail your business information, which is, part of, if you think about it, like using Simply Analytics, right? You can figure out which zip codes might be your target market, maybe people who need uh, the use of like an accountant or someone that could do their taxes, right? You can use Simply Analytics to find out where to potentially market, and then you could use that information, like the zip codes that you might find that are potentially useful, and then the U.S. Postal Service will let you purchase or let you mail to those particular um, zip codes, which is really cool. And I'll find that. I'll just throw that in here if you could just give me 1 second.
Okay. While he's finding that I had one question if I could show how to access Simply Analytics through the website, which I will do real quick. So I have the home page up over here. The URL is slcl.org. And the easiest way to find it would be to come over to this search box on the right-hand part of the screen, click website under the search box. If you leave it on catalog, you'll be searching our books and our physical materials. But when you search website, you can just type in Simply Analytics and search. And then it should be the first result. And you can click there. And on this page, when you click this blue Go to Resource button, if you're doing it from home, which you can access this from home 24/7, it'll ask you for your library card information. If you're doing it from inside the library, you should just be logged into the database. All right. And I'll stop my share. Okay. All right.
Yes, thank you. So
Yeah.
I sent that. It's called Every Door Direct. So if you ever go to that link, the nice thing is you could even type in specific zip codes of where you would like to mail for your business. So um, yeah, so thank you all for that. Those are great questions.
Yeah. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our time for this session. I've just added the feedback link into the chat. So if you could go ahead and click on that and fill it out, we'd really appreciate it. If you don't get it, you don't have time to do it right now. As I said, you'll get it in an email later following this session. But thank you so much to Juan for sharing his time and expertise for how to use Simply Analytics and give us all those great tips. Um, and thank you again for joining us for today's presentation. I think there is only one session left for the rest of the conference. So if this was your last session, thank you so much for joining us. And we'll hopefully see you around the library soon. All right. Thanks.